Hello there and welcome. I'm Etna Trainer. I'm your host for the 23rd World Petroleum Congress webinar series called Spotlight. Now, the World Petroleum Congress is held every 3 years, and without a doubt, it's one of the most important events on the global energy calendar. It's going to take place in December 2021, and it will be in the host city of Houston in Texas. It'll present a unique series of conversations with thought leaders from around the world. The World Petroleum Congress, and indeed all of our Congress sponsors, are really delighted to be able to bring you this series of webinars in the meantime, webinars that will offer you candid and engaging insights into the multitude of innovative solutions that will shape the future of energy. In our first episode, we set the scene for the state of the global energy industry, and this is our second episode. Innovating to reinvent the oil and gas industry for the post-pandemic future and the new energy system. And joining us today in conversation, I want to put a very, very warm welcome out there to the chairman of the board and the chief executive officer for Chevron Corporation. Mike Wirth joins us, so we're delighted to have him. And also sharing the platform with him today will be Jeff Miller. So I'm delighted that Jeff is with us. He is the chairman of the board, president, and the chief executive officer with Halliburton. The session will be moderated by Muqsit Ashraf. He's the managing director and the global energy sector lead with Accenture. So these two energy leaders now will engage in a conversation and share their perspectives, and particularly on the role of innovation and technology in enabling the reinvention of the energy sector. I'm going to hand over right now to Muqsit, and he will guide us through episode 2 of Spotlight. Muqsit, over to you.
Thank you, Etna, for the introductions and the great setup for this second episode on innovating to reinvent the oil and gas industry for the post-pandemic future and the new energy system. Mike and Jeff, thank you for joining us. I'm absolutely thrilled to be with you here and really looking forward to the discussion and your insights. I also want to extend a warm welcome to our audience joining from around the world. So if I may quickly set the stage for our discussion today, it may not be a stretch to say that for most, in particular our industry, 2020 was a year to forget. The industry started the year in sort of a state of urgency, facing a set of challenges that have been years in the making. And then came COVID-19, of course, which threw the industry and the world writ large into disarray. And the jolt to the energy system was extraordinarily painful. So in many ways, the pandemic, we can say, was the wake-up call the industry needed. And in that, it brought this into stark relief, the need for oil and gas players to embrace structural change and create new and sustainable sources of competitive advantage. And of course, if we look at it, innovation has to be at the heart of this industry reinvention that we're going to discuss. And that's what we will spend, obviously, a lot of time today talking about. So with that, let me gather your reflections on 2020. What would you define as the 2 or 3 imperatives that have emerged or have been reinforced as a result of the dynamics the industry has witnessed last year? Maybe let's start with you, Mike. Your perspective, please.
Sure, Muqsit. It's nice to be with you today. I'll give you a couple. The first one is a truism that still holds, and I suspect in this industry it always will, and that is the importance of a strong balance sheet. And it's the ultimate risk mitigator in a commodity business that is prone to the kinds of sharp movements in prices that we see. And certainly in our case, we came into this with a very strong balance sheet, which enabled us to actually increase our dividend and fulfill that commitment to our shareholders, and also to be in a position to do M&A during a period of time when I think it was advantageous to do so, and the industry was looking for some consolidation. So I would say that's one of the things that reinforced itself. But the second one gets into innovation, and it really is a tremendous acceleration in our use of digital technologies, which is a journey our company and everyone else in the industry has been on. But I think what we saw was tremendous increase in the rate of adoption. Working from home and some of these things are what people often think of. But for us, it's got some different twists as well. We had moved from controlling drilling operations out at the rig to actually having a good part of our Permian drilling being done from a drilling support center in Houston, where the directional drilling and steering was actually done from a central location as opposed to out on the rig. We now can do this from people's homes. And so they can actually control the drill bit from home. And a couple of years ago, people would have scoffed at that idea. We've accelerated our use of artificial intelligence in some of our operations, bringing in data from more sensors now. We've got remote experts who we used to fly to an offshore platform to troubleshoot things that are doing it through augmented reality and other forms of digital technology. We've got drones and UAVs being used in applications because we had no other choice. We've done virtual audits to ensure controls are in place. And so I think we've seen an acceleration of multiple years of digital advancement occur in just a single year. So I would say those are two really compelling lessons for me out of 2020.
That's a great perspective, Mike. Jeff, I'll turn over to you and maybe get your take from an oilfield services standpoint on the same question.
Well, as I look back on 2020, clearly a difficult year, but at the same time, we did accomplish some very important things. I think the most important was the reset of our earnings power, and that really happened around the world, but probably more focused in North America. And the result of that was changing a lot of the things that we do and how we work, implementing digital solutions, many of which we developed ourselves over time. And we thought we had a 3 or 4 year horizon or glide path to implement these things. And the second quarter gave us an opportunity to do them much more quickly. And so it changed our footprint in North America. We, in fact, reduced our real estate footprint by about half. Now, that's significant for us, but we haven't seen any change. In fact, we've seen an improvement in service quality and safety. In fact, all of those key metrics improved by over 20%. So that's very pleased to see that. But I do believe it's because we reduced costs, certainly, but it was the way that we went about it using value stream mapping and many of the tools that we have to drive that. And I'd say equally on the technology front, delivered quite a few technological advances in 2020, not the least of which would be grid power frac. It would include also our smart fleet. That's, I think, a dramatic change in the way hydraulic fracturing is performed. And then with respect to our digital business, very big business for Halliburton. And our Halliburton 4.0 strategy advanced substantially during the year. We tripled the number of users on our iEnergy cloud platform and also deepened the relationships that we have with Microsoft, Accenture, Technip, and then some very unique things that we're doing in the control space with Honeywell. So as I look back on 2020, clearly difficult year, but out of difficult years, a lot of innovation does happen.
Excellent, Jeff. Seems like we have early consensus emerging around financial muscle and digital. So hopefully we can dive a bit more into that. So maybe let's shift from looking back to looking forward. And as we think about the future energy system, there's obviously ongoing debate and I'm sure varying opinions on what the energy system of the future would look like. What would be the energy mix, who the key players would be, what archetypes or role they would take. And then what would be the driving forces, technological, societal, policy, business, that would shape that system? Jeff, let me start with you. What is your take on the future energy system and what implications does it have for your organization in the short, medium, and long term?
Well, I think it's too early to pick winners, but I think all of those different forms of energy will play a role. and including oil and gas will play a very significant role also over the near term, medium term, and long term. When we think about it at Halliburton, I think about what we can do over those same periods. And so first would be our targets, our science-based targets, which over the near term help us to reduce our own emissions. Over the medium term, we think about nutrition labels. We have nutrition labels that help our customers reduce their emissions by establishing the carbon content of the services we provide, and it allows customers then to make choice around which products they will use. It also puts a hard marker in our R&D organization that assigns value to carbon so that now we are consistently developing lower carbon solutions, again, to help our customers improve their carbon footprint as well. And then finally is our Halliburton Labs, which is a look much further into the future. But it is an environment where entrepreneurs, academics, investors, and industrial labs, in our case Halliburton, come together in order to, in my view, help the enablers of that sustainable energy future.
Thank you, Jeff. Mike, would love your take. I mean, as one of the largest energy companies in the world, obviously you're facing a number of complexities as you think about the future. So your take on the future and your imperatives, short, medium, and long term?
Sure. So first of all, the energy system in the future will be larger than it is today. There's no doubt about it. There's 7.5 billion people on the planet today. By 2040, that will go to 9 billion or more. You've got an emerging middle class today that is inexorably going to grow. And both of those trends drive an increase in demand for all types of energy. And so the system will be larger. And I also think that the system will be lower carbon. And so you've got those two trends underway. And fundamentally, energy it needs to continue to be affordable. Doesn't change people's lives if they can't afford it. It's got to be reliable. It's not good enough for it to just be there sometimes. And then it's got to be ever cleaner. And so I think that's the challenge for us, is how do we meet this growing demand in a way that maintains affordability, reliability, and is ever cleaner. That's the challenge that the industry faces. But in some ways, that's always been the challenge that we faced. And so I'm an optimist that companies like Halliburton and ours and many others that are working on these challenges are going to find a way to rise to meet that. You mentioned technology, policy, consumer behavior. All of those will affect the trajectory and the shape of the mix, but it can't change as rapidly as many people would like it to, primarily because the big consumers of energy have long capital lives. The shortest are vehicles, light duty vehicles, which, in the U.S., 12 to 15 years, you typically see as the lifespan of vehicle. Those tend to then go to another country, to Mexico, to South America, to Africa, and stay in use for another decade or more. Ships, trucks, aircraft, multiple decades, power plants, buildings, other big consumers of energy have lifespans measured in decades. So it's different than consumer electronics or some of these other things that you see a rapid product turnover and product life cycle because of the scale of the capital investment of the big drivers of energy consumption in the world. So things can't change as rapidly as some would like, which means oil and gas will be an important part of the mix long into the future, just as Jeff said. Interestingly, thematically, the three priorities I would cite are very aligned with what Jeff talked about. The first one is reducing the carbon intensity of our own operations. And we've set targets, have made great progress thus far, and have more to do to reduce the emissions footprint of the energy we produce today and that the world uses today and will be using tomorrow. We can make that cleaner and need to do so. The second thing is to reduce the carbon impact of the products themselves. And so just as Jeff is looking to help his customers reduce their carbon footprint, we're producing now renewable natural gas, renewable diesel fuel, renewable lubricating oils, and investing to grow that production. So we will invest in lower carbon products, in offsets, in powering our operations with renewable energy. And then the third area is investing in breakthrough technologies. And we've had a venture capital fund for 20 years. We've now got a focus within that fund on potential scalable and commercial breakthrough technologies in the energy space. And this is everything from carbon capture and storage to nuclear fusion to electricity storage, autonomous vehicles. We're investing across a broad range of potential technologies, all of which hold the prospect of becoming commercial and scalable to be part of the energy mix in the future.
Thanks, Mike. I mean, I'm glad you're actually, both you and Jeff are bringing to the fore the complexity of the change. Often in the discourse, the focus shifts towards one dimension. This is an energy trilemma of sorts that is being solved for, and the challenge is multi-sectoral, as you were pointing out, Mike. And then, of course, the breadth of technologies is going to be well outside of the oil field technology, operational technology domain. So then building on that, of course, as we talked about at the get-go, innovation is going to be at the heart of all of what has been discussed. And there is a migration towards, innovation beyond the core into the domain of digital that you pointed out, and clean tech as well. And of course, those haven't necessarily been major priorities in the past and are becoming so. Starting with the core, though, what will you describe as the critical areas of innovation that will underpin the transformation of the core oil and gas value chain? You talked about digital, but it would be good if you can click one level below that and talk about how do you make the industry more competitive, more agile, more sustainable? Maybe starting with you, Mike, your perspective on that.
Yeah, so if you think about what's changed the industry the most, and this is the energy industry, not just oil and gas, over the last 2 decades, it was the intersection of two technologies that were relatively well understood: directional drilling and hydraulic fracturing. And it was bringing them together in a new way to unlock performance that we hadn't seen before. I think in our core business, that same pattern likely holds the prospect for the next wave of breakthroughs. So both Jeff and I have talked about digital already, but it's digital as it intersects with material science, digital as it intersects with autonomy. I think the real key here is there are technologies and capabilities in our industry where you need deep domain knowledge in the physical sciences, in geochemistry, geology, petrophysics, and it's the intersection of those technology vectors with artificial intelligence, the Internet of Things, autonomy, big data, and it's how do you bring these new digital capabilities to bear to intersect with some of these more traditional technologies in the physical sciences that we rely on so heavily to change performance outcomes, not by 10%, but by an order of magnitude. And I think those kinds of breakthroughs are likely to come. And companies like Halliburton are working hard at that. Our people are working hard at that. We're upskilling our organization to try to fill gaps we have in the digital technology space because we're so deep in the other space that we need to find a way to bring those two together. And so, innovation sometimes is very hard to predict exactly where it will come, but I think it's the intersection of multiple different technology vectors that we're working on today.
Great, Mike. Thanks, Jeff. Of course, as a leading oilfield services company, you are driving a lot of the innovation with respect to transforming oil and gas. Your take on the same question?
Yes, I mean, I think that the opportunities are there. We're highly engaged in them. Digital. We've been in the software business a long time. In fact, we own Landmark Graphics was the original company back in the 90s. I describe it sometimes as the .com that made it. And they're an integral part of our business. And so to click a level down, one of the key parts of being effective in the software business, which Mike touched on, is the domain knowledge. And so we are in the software business. And so that gives us, I call it sometimes the productive capacity, but it gives us the credentials to be in the business of software. And that means that we're able to train our organization around agile and put that to work. an example of our smart fleet. I'll use that as an example, but in oil and gas, I think this is a big innovation, particularly in unconventionals, with respect to forever and a day, we haven't really known where the frac was. We talked about it, but we didn't really know. And because of digital capability, whether it's algorithms or different sensing, we have the ability today to really see the frac propagate and then ultimately steer the frac to where we want it to go. And I think about it like the guys that saw the first triple combo log in our business probably thought, what's that telling me? But I believe these kinds of measurements that measure the unmeasurable all of a sudden make our clients' models more effective. It allows us to do things with less, substantially less, and more effectively. And so that's just one example. But I never bet against technology, particularly in our business. And I think one of the new elements, and it's we've always driven costs down in our business. That's what technology has done, and it's kept oil and gas so competitive for so long. And I don't think that changes. I think there's a new element around that cost, which is the cost of emissions. And that is a cost, but it's, again, a cost that gets addressed with the same tools that we used to make hydrocarbons so affordable and so abundant today. And so I see that challenge around emissions really not too differently than from an oil and gas perspective and a technology perspective than many of the other challenges that we've addressed, and I'd say as an industry, addressed beautifully.
It's very well put, Jeff. All right, so maybe let's veer towards a bit of the world outside of the hydrocarbon space, so to speak, and innovation in the low carbon, no carbon domain. And of course, there are a number of technologies that have been touted as playing a significant role in this energy system of the future, whether that's hydrogen, CCUS, next generation storage, biofuels. There are a few others. Mike, what do you think? Which ones are more likely to have a meaningful impact over the next couple of decades? And what would it really take to accelerate the scaling of those technologies?
Well, I think it's going to be a mix of all of the above. It's not a zero-sum game, and these things have different applications, and they make more sense in certain parts of the energy system than they do in others. And so I don't think you're going to see any one technology dominate. I think you're going to see a number of these things come into existence. You won't see our company investing in becoming a solar and wind power producer. There's plenty of good developers out there right now that can do that. We probably won't go into down the power value chain and compete with utilities. There's well-established companies that's their core business. They're good at it, and it's not a competency that you could argue we are differentiated in. We'd be disadvantaged against people that's what they do, just as they would be disadvantaged trying to come into our business. And so the technologies we're looking to really invest in and try to incubate and scale would be things that take advantage of the unique capabilities that we have or capabilities that we can further develop and grow. And you've mentioned some of them. I mean, CCUS is an obvious one. We do CCUS today. We've got a project in Australia that stores up to 4 million tons a year of CO2 in a reservoir. We're very familiar with taking things out of pore space in the ground and moving them around and compressing them, reversing that process to take CO2. In Australia, we take it to a supercritical state and move it into a depleted reservoir. Those are things that we're good at. And so I think you should expect us to invest there. We're looking at other carbon capture technologies. Once it's captured, we actually are pretty good at handling it and getting it back into the ground. We know how to do that. But capturing it, especially from less concentrated sources, is still a challenge. We've got a venture investment we've made in a pilot project we're working on in the San Joaquin Valley with a company called Sponte that's got a direct air capture technology. That's the most dilute source you could imagine. And then we've got to work on everything in between. And so there are technical and economic challenges that have to be confronted there, but it's doable. We're producing renewable natural gas. I mentioned that earlier. I'm a chemical engineer. When I went to school, we didn't study manure lagoons and fermentation of a dairy byproduct. But we're in that business now, and we capture methane emissions that otherwise would go into the atmosphere unabated. And so you reduce a highly potent greenhouse gas in that process. We can clean it up, get it to a sales gas quality, move it into a pipeline and sell it and displace fossil natural gas. Works best in markets where you've got policy enablement because it's not cost competitive with fossil natural gas, but it's certainly technically doable. And there are markets in the world today where it's economic. And so we're investing in that. I could give you a number of other examples, geothermal. We've been in the geothermal business. Again, it's wells into the ground. It's managing fluids. It's then spinning a turbine and re-injecting the water back into the ground. How can we find ways to do that at greater scale? Or there are new ideas on geothermal technologies that might not have the classic geothermal, but some different approaches to how you manage a geothermal system and do it economically. So I think those are the kinds of things that we will invest in. In the near term, you asked for time dimension. I would say renewable fuels are here today. And in the short term, I think you're likely to see them continue to take some market share. Carbon capture and storage needs to become both lower cost and probably some policy enablement in order to really see that scale. And likewise, I think some of the more novel geothermal technologies similarly require both technology and market or policy enablement. And so they're a little further out as we look for those markers to take them to a more economic and scalable state.
That's great. I like your example of coming back full circle in life at times. So certainly interesting landscape ahead. Let's talk about another dimension of innovation. Innovation is or should not be limited to technological hardware and software. Business model changes will be equally important and relevant. What are some of the innovative business or operating model changes that will be fundamental to the transformation of the industry? Jeff, what's your take on that?
Well, I'll start with the point that Mike made, though. I think it's important because we're an oil and gas services firm. And so when we think about deploying capital, we deploy it where we have the best competitive advantage and believe we make the best returns. And so for Halliburton, that's in oil and gas and oil and gas technologies to deliver services. What we are doing, though, is we have a huge inventory of skills inside of the company. Scientific skills, manufacturing skills that scale. And so what we have done, and this is, I think, a very unique business model, which is at its core is an incubator, but more importantly, it is, in my view, the confluence of investors, entrepreneurs, academics, and industrial labs. And when I take those together, we started this journey studying Bell Labs and the kind of journey that telecommunications was. So if we think about that as a journey, it started with a busy signal and a dial tone. It became transistors, ultimately what we're doing today. I think the enablers along that journey will be more significant than trying to choose, at least for Halliburton, which type of energy wins, because I think they'll all win to a certain degree or another, as will oil and gas win to a large degree in our view, but the disruption will happen and is underway as we speak. And so consistent with what Halliburton does, we are enablers. A lot of what we do is help our clients solve problems that get a molecule from from the ground or to the burner tip. I think the disruption that's happening will require untold amounts of innovation to enable any of these things to happen. And I don't think we have to look much further than the grid in West Texas and the competition that's there today between gas, solar, and wind. And it's not straightforward. It's trillions of dollars of investment required to choose an ultimate winner. And so when we think about Halliburton Labs, from our standpoint, it's not venture capital. So we're not investing in the companies. We're providing access to our business network, to our laboratories and researchers, but also to our manufacturing and technologies. In fact, interestingly enough, chatting with a company recently that was leveraging our safety system, because an early stage company really, in order to get in front of the kind of clients they want to talk to and scale, demands that they have a robust safety program. And that's something that many early stage companies never think of. And I have many examples. Sprint through manufacturing for another one, allowed them to scale. And so I think there's a lot that we can do in that space. And as we earn credentials, not in all spaces, but elements of that, I think that's the point at which capital might be allocated. But I'm very careful about competitive advantage and where our capital goes. And so I like the journey that we're on at Halliburton, but I'm clear that it is a long journey, and it's one that I think creates value for Halliburton in the near term, but more importantly, educates us around how we compete potentially in this enabling space.
Excellent. Thanks, Jeff. I think your comment around enabling change is actually a good segue into our last theme, which is around enabling innovation, right? Because ultimately it comes down to innovation driving value creation by accelerating the transformation, the reinvention that we've been talking about. But we know that the industry has been challenged on many fronts. The pace of change, the returns as a whole, investor confidence, talent attraction and retention, to an extent collaboration, and of course needs to overcome all of these factors to really drive forward at the pace that I'm sure you all would like to see, and the industry at large. So on that point, let's maybe drill down on a few of those factors. And Jeff, I'll continue the dialogue with just leading from your point. How do you see, and maybe taking a regional lens, how do you see the role of U.S.-centric companies in particular in enabling this innovation-driven change? And maybe you can also hit on how that role differs perhaps from companies in other regions.
Well, I think that U.S. companies are well positioned, but I think we have access to a lot of technology, a lot of funding in a lot of different ways. Some will be government funding, others will be capital formation in the U.S. I think that is a place where, capital formation is probably the most transparent and has the least friction, which I think is going to underpin ultimately funding the kind of innovation at the kind of pace that I say that we expect. I do believe expectations have outrun capacity to a certain degree, but I also think that this is the kind of market where those kind of things can get money put behind them and things get done. We are a global company, and so we work in all of these countries around the world, about 70 of them. And so I think while capital formation is so important in the U.S., I would never discount the kind of innovation that happens at the coalface, where real challenges are placed in front of people, whether it's a community in a disadvantaged country, as they start to face and resolve the kinds of challenges in front of them. I would never underestimate the type of innovation that will happen all around the world. And so I don't think it's either or. I think it's both. And I think it'll be, at the pace that it can move.
Terrific. Thanks, Jeff. Mike, as they say, the pace of innovation has never been faster, and perhaps it will never be slower, which would imply that the industry will have to rely on an ecosystem of partners to drive change. And these would include oil and gas companies, these would include technology players, other non-incumbents, from adjacent or converging industries. How does the industry turn a corner on collaboration and engage a wider ecosystem of partners to really drive innovation?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. And one of the things that I would suggest is, while you can kind of grossly stereotype an industry, there are differences amongst companies. Some companies have a bias towards proprietary work and a very closed system of innovation and heavy on patents and trying to create competitive advantage that way. I think others have more of a culture of partnership and collaboration in terms of how they tend to work. And so I think there's a range of starting points today. But my personal view is these challenges are so big. The world's moving so fast. Technology is evolving so rapidly that it's unrealistic to think you can find it all within your four walls today and innovate on your own. And so we need to partner with the oil field service sector and Halliburton. We need to partner with the national labs and some of the fundamental research that's going on there that could be a guidepost to breakthroughs. We need to partner with the technology companies. We've got a big relationship with Microsoft, but we work with all the technology companies who have tremendous capabilities, but they don't have domain knowledge, to Jeff's earlier point. And so we partner with many people. A company like ours offers a large market position, a large set of assets and operating capabilities. We can be a test bed to bring these ideas out into the real world and begin to work with them and get real data to the point Jeff made on fracking and starting to really be able to understand what's happening. But we need to partner with the people that have the capability, the unique technologies, the insights, the ideas, and the innovation, and find a model. And it's not just bilateral. These may be multilateral, right? Where you've got 3, 4, 5 different people that bring different capabilities together, and you put them all against a big problem, and you're going to find a solution that any one of them never could have possibly reached. And so I think it's a cultural thing. You ask, how does the industry do? I think the industry has to be open to that. I think we have to think about the model of value sharing and value creation. You can't have everybody at the table contributing to the innovation if everybody doesn't have the chance to benefit from whatever comes out of that. And so I think there are some fundamental paradigms that perhaps have been historic operating models that need to be challenged. But it really does come down, I think, to culture and behavior at the core, and a willingness to reach out and admit you don't have all the answers and that you want to work with other people that bring a different set of perspectives to these big challenges.
Excellent. Thanks, Mike. I'll build on your comment around culture and actually just move more internal culture. Culture and workforce, I'm sure we'll all agree, is going to be critical to this change that we're seeking in the industry. So in terms of building an innovation culture and sort of reimagining the workforce to drive change of the magnitude needed by the industry, what are your top priorities with respect to that? Mike, maybe your perspective on that.
Yeah, so I'm going to touch on some of the same themes I just did. Number one is you have to have a culture of openness to listen, right, and to consider other points of view. So that means you got to have a very inclusive culture. And look, we're all working hard on tapping into the diverse talents that exist in the places where we operate. But if you have people that have different ideas, but you don't have a culture that values those ideas, you don't get the value of the creativity. And likewise, if you have a very inclusive culture, but everybody thinks the same, you don't get the fresh idea that maybe recasts a problem in a way where you start to see different solutions. So I think diversity and inclusion is the business case for me has always been pretty simple. And that is, you're going to get better creativity, better innovation if you have people that bring different backgrounds, different life experiences, different educational experiences, different ways of thinking together, and they collaborate to try to solve big problems. You've got to have a trusting culture. One where people can really believe that if they lay it out there, they can trust one another. People are going to deliver on their commitments and integrity. And I think we have to create through all of our organization a culture where we don't allow organizational silos and the way we've kind of traditionally managed business going back 100 years. to thwart some of this. I know in our company we've had silos that have been pretty strong. The upstream never used to talk to the downstream. Within the upstream, certain business units never wanted to talk to the other business units because they were competing with them, because our reward system in some ways would pit them against one another as opposed to reward them for collaborating. So you've got to get into reward systems. You've got to get into the people you put in leadership positions, the way you reinforce collaboration. And so all of that, I think, comes into the need to evolve our culture to reflect today's realities, flatter organizations, much greater lateral collaboration, less command and control from the top, more empowerment, and a real foundation built on diversity and inclusion.
Very well put, Mike. Jeff, I'm going to toss the question over to you. Of course, oilfield services, fairly resource-intensive business, very people-intensive. How do you think about your cultural and workforce priorities?
Well, I think about our culture is so important at Halliburton, and we care so much about execution, and I think that's a motivating factor, and it also drives things to get done. But the other thing we talk about, and I won't reiterate everything that Mike said, but one of our most important values is, in fact, respect, the word respect. And that means that we respect one another and we respect our authentic selves. And I think that that drives diversity and inclusion, and the diversity of ideas inside of our firm are important. And that is what drives, in my view, the best dialogue and the best outcomes, only when we apply respect and we respect one another. But I also think that as we sort of forge into the future, I call it sometimes open-mindedness, honesty, and willingness. And in the sense, the honesty in the sense that we're honest with ourselves in terms of what we can and can't do, where we really are on a journey, so that then we have an open mind around what are the possibilities. And we value open architecture in the sense that whether it's in our software is open architecture or our solutions are open architecture. And that's because we know no single firm is going to solve all of the problems, whether it's a giant problem like energy transition, or it could be a very simple problem around how to complete a well. But either way, this idea that we have to be open-minded to what are the possibilities and what is ultimately the best outcome, regardless of where we sit in that outcome. And then finally, the willingness to go execute. And that again, I can't overemphasize, in my view, the importance of an organization that does what it says it's going to do. And I think that will be incredibly important in the current context. It's been important in the past, and I believe it's what those fundamentals carry us into the future.
Very good. Thank you, Jeff. So now to $1 billion or maybe $1 trillion question, which is how does the industry build back the trust with investors to partake and then, of course, invest in all of the innovation priorities that you have very aptly outlined over the course of our discussion here. Maybe I'll start with you, Mike, your perspective on that.
I think it is $1 trillion question. If you look at what's happened to our industry, go back a little bit more than a decade, and we were around 12 or 14% of the S&P 500. Today, it's somewhere down around 2%. And so investors have lost trust in this industry. They've voted with their feet, and they've left. And I hear it when I meet with investors, and the single biggest criticism is that this industry has not been good stewards of capital. We have destroyed shareholder value, and at a time when financing has been readily available to companies large and small, this industry has pursued growth at the expense of returns. So I boil it down to 4 simple words and 2 concepts for our people. We need to deliver higher returns and lower carbon. And those are the 2 things that I hear regularly from our shareholders. And they want to know that we will generate the cash to pay their dividend, that the dividend is secure today and well into the future, and that we will be responsible in the way that we allocate that capital. And then number two, they want to know that we will be successful in the future. And that means you've got to compete in a world that will be a lower carbon world. And we have to convince them that we're on a path to do that, that we're genuine and committed to doing that. And I'm convinced that if we can deliver on higher returns and lower carbon, we'll bring investors back into this sector.
Thank you, Mike. Jeff, your take on the same question?
I am in complete agreement with Mike. It's about shareholder returns. And I think that's what brings shareholders back. That's what brings back confidence. It's, how effectively we deliver on that, how quickly we deliver on that, I think will all dictate the pace at which we generate we see more investor confidence in the industry. I can speak from my own perspective at Halliburton, 5 key priorities that we talk about them all the time. But it is, our view is a leaner but more profitable North America. We think the international market will grow, but grow profitably. Digital, we think, is a key element of, in effect, driving asset light and better productivity. And then capital efficiency, which so much has been done with our own technology book to drive better returns around either better asset velocity, or in many cases, it's just simply building the equipment at a lower cost point, whether that's because of materials, engineering that's geared around capital efficiency. But those are the components of better shareholder returns. And then finally, our focus on sustainable energy. And I've described some of those things, but I really think the three, whether it's having targets, it's the nutrition labels that drive lower emissions for our clients, and then ultimately Halliburton Labs, which I think enables a longer-term view of sustainable energy. So those 5 things, which are not as elegant as Mike, but I think we're arriving at generally the same place.
You are. I'm glad to see we started with a lot of consensus on the first question around the look back, and we have consensus on the look forward. So it's good to see that. I know we can continue our discussion for a very long time. It's a fascinating topic. I would like to shift over and take maybe a few questions from the audience. We've received, fortunately, a lot of interest on this topic and some great questions, but I'll have to limit them to a couple for each of you. So maybe I'll start with a question for you, Jeff, which is, for years we have been talking about the digital oil field and the digitalization of the oil field. Are we there yet? With the Go Green movement, is there still a need for digital oil field? And how will you draw investments to support the required innovations to enable that?
Well, the digital oil field is here today, and I would say it affects almost everything that we're doing today, and I think it will continue to evolve. I think the digital oil field is more important with the efforts to lower emissions, just because it makes everything more efficient, and it's the tools, those are many of the tools anyway, that we will use to bring down the emissions cost of producing oil and gas. I think finally, to fund all of this innovation, is that it has to drive shareholder returns in the end. And I believe that it will create value. It is creating value today, and it is a key element of our returns today.
Excellent. Thank you, Jeff. This next question, Mike, from the audience is for you. In a carbon emissions restricted post-COVID-19 global economy, are you accelerating your capital expenditure into renewables or other non-fossil fuel energy sources and production? Example, hydrogen, to hasten the energy transition?
Well, earlier on, I said shareholder returns are essential, and higher returns are, the biggest part of the equation for us. And so, capital discipline applies in new energies as well as it does in our current energies. And so, we're investing in an environment where cash flows have been constrained, and we're being very disciplined in what we invest in. So, we've stayed the course on our energy transition themes that we're investing in. We're investing significantly, hundreds of millions of dollars to reduce the carbon intensity of our current operations. I mentioned a number of the venture investments that we're making. But we don't see, we don't think we've reached peak oil, and we don't believe that a post-COVID world is going to take a step change in terms of the demand profile for energy as economies recover. In fact, there's a very good case to be made that even as policy encourages more investment in some of these new technologies, that may drive oil and gas demand up because it's an input to many of these other supply chains. And so we're staying the course, and the course has always been to invest in a number of these things for the future, for energy transition. But I wouldn't say we've accelerated that on a belief that somehow a post-COVID world is going to look dramatically different than what we saw previously.
One last question, Mike. This one I'll throw in your direction. Chevron recently announced an investment in a startup that manufactures and develops carbonate aggregates and carbon capture technology. How does that fit in your company's strategy?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, we're looking at the full value chain on carbon capture and storage. And so we're looking to capture from combustion streams, from natural gas, from production streams, and we're looking at capturing from the atmosphere and different technologies to do all of these. Then the question is, what do you do with the carbon once you have it, the CO2, once that you have it? You can use it for enhanced oil recovery. You can sequester it into a reservoir. You can try to turn it into products. And in this case, you can take flue gas. Capture the CO2 from flue gas. Doesn't have to be cleaned up to a specification that you might for some of these other uses. And then you can actually convert that into a carbonate-based aggregate that can be used as a building material and lock that CO2 up in concrete forever. And so it's a part of trying to widen out the portfolio of options for the use of CO2 after it's been captured, and we need to invest in and explore a variety of things for the storage or use of CO2 because there's a lot of it, and we would expect to capture a lot of it in the future. And so this is a very promising way for us to put that value chain together into a different product.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mike. It's hard to see a net zero world, especially by 2050, in the absence of significant advancements in carbon capture. So your perspective is spot on. In the end, I would like to perhaps get your quick closing thoughts. Jeff, maybe first to you.
Well, look, I'm an optimist, and I'm excited about the future. I think that as an industry, technology has always been sort of the X factor around driving the affordability and the abundance of energy, and I think that's going to apply equally to the carbon content and the amount of emissions around our industry. And so I'm betting on technology and excited about the future.
Very good to hear. Thank you, Jeff. Mike, your take?
Well, I'll give you a short-term take and a long-term take. 2021 is starting out. It doesn't feel a lot different than 2020 in many ways, but I think it will end much differently. And so I think this is a year of steady improvement. There may be some bumps along the way, but I think we've got a clear path on both the health situation and economic recovery as we move forward. And so I believe, while there still are difficult times here ahead of us, I think the worst is truly behind us, and I think we're on the road to a much better year here in 21. Jeff kind of stole my beliefs as well. I'm an optimist, and I believe in innovation, technology, and markets. And those three things can solve big challenges. They always have. They always will. And you can go back and study the history of this industry from the very beginning of time. And it's those three things that have met the needs of the moment and have continually moved the global economy forward, have raised the standard of living on this planet to the point now where it's the best that it's ever been. And there are more people than we've ever seen, and they're living a better life than they ever have. And that will get even better in the future. And the things that we're worried about today, I truly believe innovation, technology, and markets will find solutions. These are big challenges. No one company, no one industry, no one country will have all the solutions, but collectively, I absolutely believe that these challenges will be met, and I think the future is very bright.
Thanks, Mike. And in these times, we'll take the double dose of optimism. So it's good to hear, a uniform perspective on that. With that, thank you, Mike and Jeff, for a fascinating dialogue. Both of you offered a terrific perspective, I thought, on the future of the industry, and in particular, the role of innovation in shaping that future. And in doing so, I thought you brought to the fore, as you said very rightly at the end, a healthy dose of optimism, which is absolutely needed for the industry as it gets ready to tackle the challenges it faces head on, and starting this year in 2021, begin to demonstrate how resilient, enduring, vital it can be again. I'm looking forward to picking up on this theme and others when we meet later this year at the Congress in Houston. And I thank you again for your participation in the discussion today. I would also like to thank all of our viewers around the world who joined us for this fabulous panel discussion. And with that, I am going to turn it over to Ethna for her closing comments.
And thank you so much, Muqsit, and indeed to our panelists. Thank you so much for that really engaging and enlightening discussion. I think we have so many great takeaways here. Now, certainly when we look back on 2020, it was a difficult year for everybody. But out of those difficult circumstances comes innovation. In 2020, we heard that there was an acceleration in use of digital technology, and digital solutions were implemented at a much faster rate than anybody really had thought possible. The energy system of the future will be much bigger than it is today, and it will also have a lower carbon footprint. But however, the change will probably not happen as rapidly as many would like to see it. It is very, very clear that hydrocarbons will continue to have a role in the energy mix as companies strive to reduce the carbon intensity of operations, decrease the carbon impact of products, and invest in breakthrough technologies. The next wave of innovation will come from many places, and it will happen indeed in many, many different ways, including multi-layered partnerships with government, with academia, and indeed the private sector. And all of this should result in all forms of energy actually winning. And finally, as you've heard, and indeed you probably know, this industry certainly has the confidence, the people, it has the capabilities, and it has that deep domain knowledge to collaborate among itself, of course, and with others to really solve these large, complex, and complicated challenges that are out there. And what we're seeing here, of course, is a challenge of necessity to deliver the energy system of the future that will offer reliable, affordable, and ever cleaner energy to the world. Now, a replay of this discussion will certainly be available on the website on video on demand, so keep an eye on that, and that should be up there shortly. We're definitely looking forward to airing episode 3, working on that already in the coming weeks. And that session will look at charting the course for a sustainable energy future. So we will indeed be continuing this conversation. Also, remember now that the 23rd World Petroleum Congress is scheduled for December the 5th until the 9th in 2021. So at the end of the year, we're all looking forward to that. And as always for me, it just remains to say it's been an absolute delight to be with you. So until the next time, be sure and follow us, the 23rd World Petroleum Congress, on social media. The hashtag there that you'll need is hashtag 23WPC2021. So that's hashtag 23WPC 2021. So stay involved, share this webinar with your friends, your colleagues, and of course, stay involved and stay in touch with us. From all of us here at the World Petroleum Congress, and indeed from the Spotlight team. That's it for me. Thank you so much for being with us.